Okay.
Paul, we are both present. Councilman, would you like to lead us to the flag salute, please?
Hand over your heart. Ready to begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This is time where we'll take public comments. We would ask you to limit your comments in terms of time and scope to matters that affect this task force. Are there any public comments? Mr. Chavez.
I just had a quick question in regards to each neighborhood's funding. I know when the city manager attended the INCO a couple months ago, addressing them in regards to building better relationships between the city, neighborhoods, trying to create a unity throughout the city. And a question came up in regards to each individual neighborhood having their own account or reserve funds. And it was unclear on exactly how much funds were in each neighborhood. But yesterday at City Council, River Park, it was said that their dog park was being funded through their neighborhood. So I don't know if this task force has any information in regards to just exactly how much each neighborhood has as far as funding goes, as far as maintaining their neighborhoods or adding additions such as like a dog park.
Generally, there are no set-aside neighborhood funds unless you're in a special assessment district or a community facilities district. The only other set-aside money that might be in a specific neighborhood would be Quimby fees, which are regulated for parks. So those would be the end. Beth or Mr. Moore, is that pretty close to accurate?
That's accurate.
Okay.
If you want more information, you get with Mike, because he helps manage all that, and Sandra too with the finances.
I just asked because I know when the question was posed to you at INCO, you were unsure exactly how much neighborhoods had. Some neighborhoods were saying that they had about 1,600 in their account, and everybody was throwing out numbers that their neighborhood themselves had, and you were unsure just exactly the actual numbers, or if some neighborhoods even had the money.
Right.
I believe there's one neighborhood
So
that has none.
we have like 40 some of them, and we spent a year or so going through all the maintenance districts. So it's, we could spend an hour on that topic. We spent months on that topic. So certainly we've got that through the finance department, and they can show you all of that for all 40 some. And then, like council member said, there's Quimby fees for different areas. So it's there's a lot of information there. We do have that in the finance department, and you can meet with them and they can show you that.
Mr. Moore here is the keys of the number.
Yeah.
He's best suited. Mr. Nash.
Good morning, all. And I know that time is of the essence, but I would hope that of the 175 days, the ones that pertain specifically to the treasurer's office, and I enumerated them at one meeting, that they get implemented before we elect a new treasurer, just so that that person can hit the ground running.
Okay. Any other comments? Mr. Library.
Yeah, just a couple of things. First of all, I want to talk about the good news. The S&P finding the city's, affirming the city's rating, general fund rating. That's a good thing. The other good thing, obviously, is the audit. Blessing by the SCO. That's a major step forward for the city. At least it gives the city a base to go on now. We finally got good numbers that can build on in the future. It's good to see all the new faces here too. It's like, it's great that the finance department is finally getting more fully staffed, so that's good news too. I had a comment on the 107 findings plus a couple other things. One of them is that it was obvious to me that the 107 findings they said they were all going to be due June of next year, but there was no prioritization. Some of them only pertained on last year's audit. They were irrelevant to this year's audit. Some of it, so you don't know which ones are going to be done first, which ones are done second. Plus, the most important thing is you're in an audit year now, for June 30th, 2016. So wouldn't these 107 recommendations have to be completed right now in order to be put in applied to the audit that's, I don't know if it's underway yet, but about to be underway. So it's like a moot point. I mean, to put it off to a year, it's not gonna help this year's audit. So this year's audit gonna have 100 findings because they're not gonna be completed to June 30th, 2017? Does that mean this year's audit's not gonna be ready to June 30th, 2017? You know, those are the kind of questions I have. But my main question is about the city's forecast. I'm having, not just me, but I know a lot of people out, the public safety unions have a lot of problems with this. I do. I just can't reconcile how the city changed its costs so quickly without any major disruption. No layoffs, no cuts in pay. I looked at the two forecasts. Mr. Milligan's forecast said next year, fiscal year 17-18, he did this in May of last year, $11 million in cuts were necessary. I have the forecast. In the city's forecast, after the MOU changes, it says the city's gonna have $715,000 surplus. That's a $12 million difference. How do you get $12 million turnaround in 1 year? That's impossible. So there's only two things that can happen. Two explanations. One is that the financial crisis last year was completely manufactured. I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm leaning towards that. That has to be explained. The second thing is, shit, I can't think of this anymore. There has to be a reconciliation between the two views. Now, the only other thing that I can think of is that, are there $12 million worth of vacancies in the general fund? We need to know that. We need to know the vacancy amounts. That's very, very important. Because that's the only explanation that makes any sense why the city is even close to having a balanced budget. In other words, it's funding its deficit through vacancy savings. So services aren't being done. It's hard for the public to know because we can't tell on a service everything looks okay. You can only tell on the inside of the organization whether things are getting done or not. So we need to know these numbers. Councilman Perello's raised these questions. I think he raised 7 or 8 questions a couple weeks ago. We'll be good to get those answers pretty quickly before the election. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Passion?
Yes, thank you, Mr. MacDonald. As I mentioned, what Daniel Chavez said when our city manager, Mr. Nyhoff, was at the INCO, tied in with the Quimby funds, he did state that he needs some time to search out the issue for the Quimby funds for the various parks. So I wanted to make mention of that.
Yeah, in agreeing with Jim, if I recall, the current year's budget shows a property tax increase of between 8 and 12%. And what's confusing is the county auditor controller who establishes the rates for each of the cities in the county identifies that we'll be getting a 3.5% increase in property taxes. I'm interested in knowing what the difference is between his estimate and, in my past experience, the county is pretty accurate in estimating property tax. But on the S&P report, being that I'm just a simple country bookkeeper, maybe someone can explain one of their concerns. They say, quote, the city has entered into 3 floating to fixed interest rate swaps, which are derivatives, with a notional value of $47,715,000. It pays the counterparty a fixed amount of 3.5, 4.0, and 4.0% on each swap agreement, respectively, and receives variable payments computed as 68% of the 1-month LIBOR, which is the London Interbank rate. As of June 30th, and this is what bothers me, 2015, this interest rate swap, which has a notional value of $47,715,000, has a market value of negative $9,916,913. Can someone explain to this simple bookkeeper what risks that puts the city into, if any?
What's that?
It's part of the presentation.
Okay. Yeah, I'm being told as part of the presentation you're going to see this morning, so hopefully that'll answer your questions. Any other comments? See no?
I'd just like to say,
Sure.
Mr. Travis, some neighborhood councils, they'll have like kitty. People go to meetings, they'll make a donation, and they may have like a couple $100, maybe $1,000, and it's separate from funds from the city of Oxnard. So that's the only other funds that I know about would be capacity picture. And they'll use it for buying cookies or putting on a picnic or ice cream bars for the kids or something like that.
Hey, Councilmember, you had a chance to look at the minutes?
Yes.
Are you okay with them?
Yes.
Then we will accept the minutes from last meeting. We'll move to item D, subject update on wastewater ballot measure financial implications. Not sure we do.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've actually been anxiously awaiting this presentation by our financial advisor, who's here today from Hilltop Securities. I'd like to introduce Phil Curls. He's going to be providing you with a presentation on just the status of where we're at with our S&P credit rating, as well as the letter of credit and a number of other issues he's been helping us with. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Curls.
Thank you, Maria. Well, while the presentation is about to come on.
That's not
For
it.
the camera, you won't hear it.
Okay. As the presentation is about to come on, again, my name is Philip Curls. I'm from First Southwest, a division of Hilltop Securities. We are a nationally renowned financial advisory firm, investment bank that solely focuses on municipalities. And I've had the pleasure of working with the city over the past number of years to deal with a number of situations that the city has found itself in. And I've spoke at other meetings that were addressing the rating implications, the public markets implications of wastewater increases, how they were necessary for multiple reasons. And I touched on, when I spoke, the path that was possible if the rate increases that were requested did not get put into place. So today I wanted to go into a little bit more detail about the interrelated things that are going on, specifically in relation to the transaction that the gentleman just mentioned regarding the swap, the variable rate transaction, and put it in terms that everyone could probably understand, and also be here to answer any questions. So just at the high level, there's three main reasons why a repeal of wastewater rates back to their previous levels would severely harm the wastewater fund and its ability to continue. The first is just pure cash. The rate increases that are expected to are actually implemented now. They were needed to make sure that the reserve levels would not dip any lower and approach appropriate levels. There are dire financial consequences that are related to the variable rate bonds that were issued in 2004, and I will go into more detail about that. And if the rates were repealed, you put yourself in a position where you're not able to access the public markets as the vast majority of other municipalities are. Your options are limited, and the options that are available are prohibitively expensive. I believe can I address questions now, or?
Can we let him get through the presentation and we'll get your questions?
I would. The only thing I was going to ask is, do we have the financial statements here so that instead of just hearing these nice words and terrible things, we could actually see numbers, balance sheets, income statements in the last audit? Is that available to us?
We don't have anything here, I'm sorry.
So we have nothing to verify what you're saying, we just believe in what you're saying. Okay, go ahead.
Well, the information that I'm presenting is more forward-looking. So a financial audit will disclose all of these issues, but it won't go into the kind of detail that I'm going to present. So you're more than welcome to look at the audit, but this will add.
Begin by pulling numbers out of the air. Your future numbers mean nothing. but if you begin by starting with balance sheet numbers that have been audited, at least we can ask questions of how did you get 1, 2, or 3 years in the future, given an understandable start number. That's where I'm coming from. I'm sorry.
Point duly taken. So in terms of the cash need, the city's wastewater fund cash is generally separated into 2 categories. There is an operating reserve, and then there are reserves that are kept that are based off of money that's generated from connection fees. And what you'll see in 2013, 2014, and 2015, the operating reserves were a fair amount. S&P has noted that those cash balances were fair. In light of the needed capital improvements that the wastewater system has been described, that you would like to have more, because the less cash that you have, that means the more that you would theoretically have to borrow to make the improvements that you need. But in fiscal year 16, we saw an increase in O&M in terms of the budgeted numbers, and we're going to see a larger drop in our cash balances. Now, one of the things that is worth noting is that the increases that went into place, 35%, a large increase, was effective a third of the year in 2016. So in 2017, we expect that cash balances are going to be on the upward trend, as you'll see in just a moment. However, there's not much room to fall if you were to yank the rate increase from the wastewater system. The city would be in a position where, I'm not here to really speculate about the actions that the city would have to take if a repeal went into place. There's certain things that the city can do, but this is to assume that the rate repeal were in place and that was just going to be the new normal. You were just going to go back to your old rates and nothing else would happen. So again, the floor of the rates the floor of the cash that you have would be relatively low levels. So this assumes the rate increases are continued as scheduled. There's another rate increase scheduled for January of 2017 and January of 18 that would be implemented, and you would see operating balances start to recover, and you would be on a path to reach a cash level that is in line with your reserve policies. So just a note about the assumptions. The rate repeal would take away, just looking at fiscal year 18, it would take away roughly $8 million that is what they would have in 18. It would take $3 million away in from the January 2017 rate increase, and an additional $1.3 million for the 8% increase in 2018. So that's roughly a $12 million annual gap that's now going to be created, without any other further action. So what happens if rate repeals are in place, but and no other action is taken? Well, you immediately start to draw down your reserves. This assumes that the rate repeal would actually be effective January 2017. You would immediately have to draw down reserves, and you really couldn't stop. The wastewater system would be in a position where they would have to borrow from other funds to maintain operations and/or mass layoffs, and the system is not in a position to really withstand either one of those. So that's just from it, and I think the takeaway from this graph is that the angle at which cash needs to be drawn down is substantial. It's not something that could be sustained for any given time, and it sends a very dangerous message to the capital markets and the financial institutions that the city is working with right now in those previous transactions. This alone would be a troublesome scenario. However, in my next slides, there's a little bit more at stake because the city is not the only one at the table. So I'm going to explain who else is at the table. So in 2004, the city sold wastewater revenue bonds that were variable rate. And basically, when you sell a variable rate bond, you will need a letter of credit. And right now, MUFG Union Bank is the letter of credit provider. MUFG pays the bondholders first. That is their job. The bondholders look at this bond as if MUFG is rating it. They don't really care much at all about the city's rating. They care about the letter of credit because right now that they are the first person that pays them. That's all they care about. If you look right now, the bondholders are getting paid a rate that is on top of what pretty much every other variable rate bondholder gets. So it has no implications on terms of the Oxnard's rating.
Mr. Chair, just, you say a letter of credit, I'm not sure everybody just understands in just easy terms what that means. I always like to say sometimes when I first bought my first house and I didn't have that great of a job or my mortgage, I had to get insurance that somebody would insure that I was going to pay my mortgage. Is that what that letter of credit is here? Explain that letter of credit.
It's different than mortgage insurance in that variable rate bondholders, the only reason why they're buying is for liquidity. At any time, if they invest $1,000, at any time they can pull that $1,000 back out of this investment. They're not buying and they don't have to try to find another buyer for their investment. The letter of credit, the MUFG in this position is saying we will buy back your bonds at 100% of par no matter what. And you can do that immediately. So they charge a very low rate. Or the bondholders charge a low rate. It's very short-term money. So it's more the liquidity that the letter of credit is in place.
The Union Bank, I'm sorry, my name is Lou Feldman. I'm the bond counsel for the city. I'm with Feldman Law Group in Santa Monica, California. The Union Bank is actually, in effect, selling its own security, and then the city has a reimbursement obligation. We took out a variable rate mortgage on the house, and then we fixed it so that we didn't have the exposure in the future to interest rates going up because nobody knew at the time. And so that's why there's a swap in place. That swap is another person guaranteeing to pay us as if we were on a fixed rate basis, and they thought that rates would fall so they'd be able to make money. But the bottom line here is that Union Banks, when the underwriter sells bonds, they're really selling Union Bank's credit. And then, as the city manager was saying, it's the first one to pay, so it's really a guarantor of the payment. If we fail to pay them, then they can take remedies, and other people who are at the table all have the same kind of remedies. So it is exactly as you're saying. You needed a guarantor to come to the table. They came to the table, and that allows us to then issue bonds, which bear a much lower rate because people can give them back to the underwriter, which and have the Union Bank letter of credit drawn on any week, actually, and that keeps the interest rate low.
Somebody, maybe you can explain to us why the heck did the city issue fixed rate bonds?
It was actually cheaper at the time to do the swap.
Yeah, but you just said you knew the interest rates were going to go up.
No, we didn't know interest rates were going to go up. We hedged against interest rates because nobody knows whether they go up or down. But you're at a 4% rate, let's say, or 3% rate. That's still pretty smart. If you went to the market today, you get the same thing. Yeah, yeah. I think exactly. Go ahead, Philip.
Well, Lou introduced the swap component. So just to finish here in the letter of credit, if the reason why they are a necessary component is that, let's just say, for instance, you didn't have a letter of credit. the wastewater system would have to be able to give back bondholders their money at any time, the same way MUFG does. And since the city wastewater system doesn't have the roughly $16 million lying around in cash to pay people back for their bonds, they have a letter of credit to do it for them. But the letter of credit, or someone to provide the liquidity to the bondholders, is a necessary component to the transaction. So this is one transaction. Then there's the swap, which Lou just mentioned, and the swap counterparty, which the city is a partner with here, is RBC Capital Markets. The city's wastewater system pays them a fixed payment. It's approximately 4%. And RBC in return pays a variable rate that fluctuates with 1-month LIBOR. And the thought is that this leg will be very close to this leg. And this leg is the same as this leg. I apologize for anyone who's not viewing this. But so that the city, in effect, ends up paying just the fixed component. Well, the interest market has changed since the swap was actually put in place in either 2006 or 2007. At the moment, RBC is paying the city, I believe, 36.36%. And that's 68% of 1-month LIBOR right now. But the city is paying RBC, still paying that 4% amount. So RBC is in the positive every time now because of the way that interest rates have moved. And that's going to become an important factor when you say, well, what if I wanted to get out of this swap? What would I have to do? Well, you would have to make RBC whole for the cash flows that they're currently getting. And that is where that termination value that was just mentioned comes from. So again, I'm trying to walk through all the parties here. The last party that I want to mention is AMBAC, who is the bond insurer on this transaction and also the swap insurer on this transaction. AMBAC at the time was a AAA rated bond insurance company, and they are paid a one-time fee at the issuance of the bonds to be the insurer, and by insurer, they are willing to step in case the city does not pay, and that in a way protects the other parties here. I think that's, and then the last, I'm sorry, those are the people at the table, and then there's S&P. S&P, which you guys should be familiar with, rates the city's general fund, water fund, and wastewater fund. The rating that S&P gives the city is an important component to this transaction. As this deal was made, as to assurance to RBC, MUFG, and AMBAC to some extent, the city covenanted that they're going to keep their rating above at a triple B level, and not anything below to triple B minus. And if they did go to triple B minus, RBC in particular is able to exit this swap and potentially put the termination payment, send an invoice to the city. So let's go to where we are in terms of our rating. Like I mentioned, triple B minus is the threshold at which a swap termination is potential from the other side, where RBC could execute a swap termination. And right now, even though there's $16 million in bonds outstanding, the swap termination payment as of October 5th is $4.3 million. If RBC elected to terminate the swap, that would be due and payable immediately. As you can see also, in terms of the rating history, this wastewater system was at A+ for a very long time. And then in 2011, it dropped to triple B. And actually, there was a positive outlook
in 2014, but then it got dropped back down to stable in 2015. And it's not currently under review, but S&P does have a roughly a year cycle that they want to review credits. So eventually it will get reviewed again. If the wastewater repeal is successful, we expect to hear from S&P within 48 hours of what are the plans now, because they understand this. They understand that there's 4.3 million in a possible liability. And they also know they understand the cash balance situation. So we actually talked through a lot of these topics. This is what is the letter of credit, why is it needed? And MUFG has voiced deep concerns about the situation here. They are optimistic in that that necessary rate increases were put into place. They're not as optimistic about a potential repeal. I'll just leave that there. The issue with the letter of credit is if for whatever reason the letter of credit expires and MUFG does not extend it, there are mechanisms in the documents that allows, I'm going to go back to our diagram, it allows MUFG to say, we're going to let this expire, and per the documents, all you bondholders, you have to sell your bonds back to us immediately. So then all the bondholders get taken out, and MUFG holds all of the 16 million in bonds. Then MUFG says, city, all 16 million are due and payable now. Unless, your options are finance us out, find somebody else to give you 16 million, then you give us our 16 million, or find someone else to be your letter of credit. But we are out, and this is what we're going to do. That is a situation that the city doesn't want to be in. So if you're counting, you have roughly 16 million that's possibly out there in terms of could be due to the city if, under this doomsday scenario. And then you also have the swap termination payment. So that's 20 million in liabilities for a system that does not have that kind of money. So I think the point is that does RBC have the option to execute the termination payment? Yes, they have the option. Do they want to force the city into the wastewater system into dire straits? They don't. Their RBC has a lot of public agencies that are that's part of their business. They don't want to be known for a company that's pushing cities into dire situations. And MUFG also, this is their business line. They don't want to be known as the letter of credit that pushed the wastewater system into this situation. However, if they see that the management can't even make the right decisions, that through a ballot measure, that can undermine management's ability to make the right decisions, at some point, you got to say, well, I think we need our money back. And the point is, do you want to hand over the wastewater funds financial reliability? Do you want to hand that over to a private company that doesn't really owe the city anything? And that's essentially, if you go down that road, that's what you would be doing.
Just real quick, Mr. Miller.
I'll wait for a minute. I'd like to talk. Yeah, can we finish soon, because these people need to leave at 10:30. Yeah, we have questions.
Okay. Well, I've talked through most of this, and I will speed up here. The documents, which are very extensive, have explain everything, that if all the various scenarios that happen or that can happen, who pays and what they pay. If for some reason we're not able to make the payment that would be due, your interest rate goes from what's relatively low right now, it moves up to a default rate. And right now, I believe it would be around 7%, but that floats with prime. And whether AMBAC pays the letter of credit or the Union Bank holds on to the bonds themselves, you're looking at a default rate that would substantially start to add up. And the last point is that it will take a long time for the name Oxnard to ring the same with investors. Once this becomes, this will be known in the public markets. Everybody will know about it if you deal in municipal bonds. It takes a long time for the market to get used to that name again after it's been known as being part of something that's this kind of situation. I think Jefferson County is a name in, I believe it's in Georgia, Alabama, my mistake. And that name it's going to take a while for that name to get normal interest rates because it's associated with a default, with, I believe, their sewer system or a utility. So I'll kind of run through this too, and this is kind of dovetails to with your investor name. You don't have access to the capital that you need in order to make the improvements that the wastewater fund and system requires. I think the utility department has done they've explained it on multiple occasions, the need for renovations, the need for changing of the systems. And the question is, well, where will the money come from if nobody trusts you to pay them back? With that, I'll close and open it up for questions. So I want to thank you for your patience.
Just one point of clarification as we talk about this is that, you know, we have covenants, contracts with our bondholders that say you will have debt coverage up to X. And are we currently meeting that, number one? Number two is, does S&P look at that when they do their rating analysis, and would not meeting our contractual debt coverage obligations potentially impact their rating in a downward, looking downward at that? So if you could just real quickly. So
the answer to both of your questions is yes. I actually tried to avoid the debt service coverage conversation in this presentation. It's been covered in other presentations because it's not. It may be hard. It may be kind of hard to understand what goes into the number and why that number matters. But S&P and investors in general, they want to make sure that after you've paid everybody, how much money do you have left over to pay them? Because you have to pay your O&M first, and then you can pay bondholders. So there's a metric that they use, debt service coverage. How much do you have left over after you make all the payments that you have to pay? And the wastewater system is, I believe, for 2015 was 0.8, around 0.8, and in fiscal year 16, it's much lower than that. Or it's expected to be much lower than that. However, in 17, with the rate increases, you actually move back up over one time, so that means you can pay all of your debt service on your bonds, and there's money left over to help you increase your cash balances. And these are things that S&P cares about, and whoever you're selling your credit to, be it the letter of credit bank, a bond investor, they want to know that you're doing the right things to make sure that you have a sustainable system. So that's one of the metrics that everyone looks at.
Number of thoughts here. First of all, this whole thing is based on the house of cards that were presented. It makes the assumption, first of all the numbers are right. That's already been pointed out by Mr. Molina, who, by the way, is a former finance director for Oxnard, who sued the city and won $875,000. He's also a treasurer candidate, and I'm really glad that he is. Mr. Lavery is a respected former financial executive that knows what he's talking about, has been watching city finances for a long time. If you're basing your analysis on the erroneous assumption that this Measure M to rescind the rate request is some silly populist feel-good thing, and that's going to bankrupt the city, you're absolutely wrong. The real reason for that, and you should crank that into your analysis, is that they would like to engage the city and renegotiate the capital plan, which they think is invalid. If that was done, the city would actually be more creditworthy, not less creditworthy, because it would accumulate less debt and have a solution that would be more cost-effective. And somehow that's not factored into your analysis at all. I don't know who the hell is feeding you the data. They have a big problem with way this whole thing is proceeding. So I think we need to go back and try and do this thing again. The city could have avoided this entire mess by A, not coming up with this ridiculous derivative swap agreement, which is speculation of the utmost, and I think we should be looking at a new bond council under a new treasurer. I really think that's totally illegitimate. I think also the city should have engaged the opponents of the capital plan a long time ago, instead of playing high-stakes poker and moving this thing to an election and a confrontation, which could have been totally avoided and still can be avoided. Thank you.
Ms. Molina?
Yeah, one of your slides showed the downturn going way down, and it assumes that the amounts are $2 million and the balance is not going to be the cash balances. But what you didn't mention is that in the last year of financial reports, almost $3 million of that increased O&M was consulting costs. Now, if we hadn't had those consulting costs, your graph would have been completely reversed. I don't know if anyone mentioned that to you or not. The other question is, you showed a default rate of 7%, but you didn't know what the current rate is. Does anyone know what that current rate is? They ought to have a kind of a good idea of what the current rate is.
The current rate of what?
Well, you were talking, everything goes to heck, we're going to have to pay a default rate of 7%. But you said, well, the current rate is, and you kind of fluffed off. What is that current rate if you know what the default rate is?
Okay, so the default rate is calculated by the reference rate, which I believe right now is 3.5%.
What is a reference rate? Is that the actual current
It's
rate?
a prime. It's a kind of a market-based rate. No, it has nothing to do with the swap. It's a prime rate plus an additional 3.5. And so as prime moves, the rate will move up. As it moves down, it would move down. It's variable rate, but starting from a higher beginning. Right now, the variable rate bonds are paying bondholders 0.87.
The other thing is, I agree with what's been said before. You come and you paint in the middle of an election doom and gloom, and if we were to default, and I don't see anything in the financial reports that ever indicate that we're going to ever default on the debt service payment, which is a bondholder, what you're really interested in, is this city going to pay its bond debt service? I see nothing that indicates they are not. But you assume that, well, if everything goes to heck, we'll never be able to go out to the market again. Well, isn't that what the rates are about? Theoretically, you go out there, you sell triple B and triple double B, you're going to pay more, but the market's always going to be there. So don't assume and don't scare us into thinking, well, gosh, if this all happens, you'll never be in the market again. That's BS, and you shouldn't say that.
I didn't say that, sir.
Mostly, well, that's the implication you gave very clearly. And the other issue is, I think what you want to be saying is, as long as the city continues to make their debt service payments, and as long as their budget shows that they're going to be making their debt service payment, usually the market, they'll give us hell, so to speak, but they're not going to do anything as long as it's clear that we're using and budgeting for debt service payment and that we're making debt service payment.
So, yeah, well, you mentioned a number of things, and I'm going to try to address them as much as I can. The point of the graph is that how from what we know, sustainable making of payments isn't possible if you just take away $12 million a year that the city is relying on. So yes, to date, the city has not missed a payment, and we should be thankful. That's a very good thing. Do we want to flirt with not making a payment? I think that the conversation in terms of the revision of the capital program, that's kind of outside of my purview, but I think that I would continue to pursue those conversations from the public to.
Sure, I hate to interrupt you, but this is probably something we could spend the next 6 or 8 hours talking on. So I'm going to move ahead with another question from Mr. Lavery, and then Ms. Purcell.
I just want to.
Okay.
First of all, I'm not associated with this Measure M thing at all, even though Mr. Miller mentioned it. I'm for the increases, so don't intervene with them. But I do have some issues with the way the city is handling this. One is that last year, there was a review of wastewater, water, and you could tell back then that there were negative cash flows. Like the city was far out spending what was taken in because of the drought in the water fund and all that. But the city didn't stop spending, to meet, so it exacerbated the problem. In other words, it didn't cut back its expenditures to any extent that it could to make it more equitable with the revenue side. So the city, I think, has made this problem worse. It has made it a doomsday scenario where maybe it didn't have to. But I do think that the city, I don't think at this point it's a choice, because you showed that graph in 2006 where the bonds had an A rating. Well, that's when the city stopped raising rates. So the city councils, told the staff, or the staff thought council didn't want rate increases. So it didn't happen. So they didn't put any money in the system. And now this is the inevitable result. So we have to raise rates, and they have to be double digits for many years, but I don't know if it's 35%. That's the part I don't know, because there's all sorts of capital, hundreds of millions of dollars of capital improvements that are going to be financed out of these. And we don't, it's very difficult to say what's absolutely necessary and what's, a beautiful new facility. You don't know what that cutoff point is. But one of the things that I don't like is that this infrastructure use fee, the city raised it from $3 million to $7 million. The general fund charges the utilities for this wear and tear of the city streets. That fee went from $3 million to $7 million. And I don't think that would happen with a vote from council. The sewer fund pays $3 million a year. That money goes directly to the general fund. It's sitting there, hasn't been spent. I think that fee should be rescinded. And then you just save $3 million right there. The money is supposed to go for street repairs. It's used, $5 million was transferred in the 14-15 audit from that fund, it was Street Fund 105, into the general fund and buffered the city's reserves by $5 million. So when Standard & Poor's said the city has great reserves, $5 million of that was from money taken from our pockets, put in the general fund, sitting there. There's more or less a slush fund, I would call it. So I think there's things that the city can do. I think the city needs to cut back on its expenditures. It needs to eliminate this fee in all the utilities until you can figure this out. That way you could lessen the rate increases that you would need. This money is not going for streets. It's making the general fund balance sheet look good. That's all it's doing right now. Thank you.
So my comments are kind of similar to some of what George said, but you've been sent here to kind of be the front man to this for an Armageddon scenario, doomsday as you called it. And it's all predicated on caveats that are not representative of reality. You said this all assumes that the rates are repealed and the old rates are the new normal forever going forward. And that's not where we stand. Those are not the only two options. There are a lot of numbers in between a 0% increase and an 87% increase. There's a lot of numbers in between. And there are options in there to cover the 1.0 debt service ratio that's required by the bonds versus the 1.25 that I understand is just a policy of council. And whatever questions there are about the capital expenditures, there's a lot of numbers in between. So could you address, how it changes if the city does something in between 0 and 87%?
Yes, I was not implying that Mr. Lavery was involved with Measure M. I was only referring to his earlier comments where he questioned the financial numbers used in the analysis.
Okay. Mr. Nash, and I'll come to you, Mr. Towers.
Yeah, it's impossible to dumb down this presentation enough for the general public to understand. I will just say that I stand in stark opposition to both elected and want to be elected individuals who, in my mind, are denying the reality of, the risk of a credit rating, losing our credit rating, triggering the swap termination payment, and, indeed, the overriding fact of a crumbling infrastructure. So I hope that we can find a way forward, but, we can't, even though, I have great respect for the bean counters, this isn't just about beans. I mean, it's about, protecting the health, safety, and welfare of the residents. I don't want our treatment plant to experience, what would really be a catastrophic failure. And it would have great impact and degradation on our receiving waters. To me, that's the overriding issue. So we can argue about the numbers from here to eternity. The overriding fact is we have to repair the infrastructure. So that's all. Thank you.
Mr. Chapman.
So, looking at this and then hearing you talk about, MUFG, Union Bank, how they voiced their concerns, and even on slide 10, it's bold, underlying that they voiced their deep concerns. I'm assuming that it wasn't your intentions to strike fear into all of us in regards to that. If MUFG wanted to, they can go to the bondholders, say, sell back the bonds back to us, and then turn around, go to the city and say, city, now you owe us $16 million plus the termination fee, bringing us up to about $20 million. So, reading this, has MFUG come to the city and said that this is a possibility that we are going to go to our bondholders and request the bonds back and look into termination process of saying, okay, now the city owes us $20 million. Again, I doubt that was your intention coming here, saying that. And I understand you're just trying to cover all the bases, show the pros, show the cons for the repeal. But that concerns me when I'm hearing everyone else talk about that the numbers aren't accurate. And this is an issue that has been going on for quite a few number of months now, of numbers are not being accurate and are constantly changing month to month, new presenter to new presenter. So I guess the ultimate question is, has MFUG come to the city and says, this is a potential that we are going to buy back our bonds and you're going to be on the hook for $20 million?
Can I answer his question? Sure. So the conversations that we've had with MUFG, they voiced concerns about the status of the financials. They are setting the rates to the letter of credit in a manner of which they have more or less communicated they would like to find a replacement. They have not overtly said this is what we will do if this happens. As you mentioned, my job here is to really explain the way that these arrangements are made up and the risks that you are vulnerable to if certain contingencies happen. I would say that the credit story for the wastewater system is actually an improving one. If the rate repeal is not successful, you have upward pressure on your rating. It affirms that management can make the decisions that they feel are prudent. I don't know what the world looks like on the other side of a voter-approved repeal, but I do know that this scenario is out there, but the probability of it, I'm not in a position to say. I'm just here just explaining the facts as we understand them.
Thank you. Mr. Molina?
A couple of things. One, those of us, at least some of us who are in support of the measure that would eliminate the rate, as has been mentioned earlier, we're not saying there isn't the need for a rate increase. We're saying that consistent with Prop 218, the city has not identified or justified why they need a 35% rate increase, followed by all these additional rate increases. Part of the reason being is that the city engineer's own report said that for 74 million, not 675 million, all the improvements that are needed to make this wastewater treatment plant fully functional for the next 10 or 15 years could be done for 74 million. And that's part of our concern. We want to understand that. The second thing is, if I was any one of the people on that chart, my biggest concern is that your audit, which the state said was a quality audit, shows that this city is in such bad management condition that we don't trust what you guys are doing. Forget I don't know how they could even justify whether or not we're having debt coverage or not, given how bad the auditor said the financial reports are. So, it's not necessarily because our revenues aren't what they want, but rather, hey, look guys, we've never seen an audit that's this bad in our entire history as bond counsel, bond underwriters, rating agencies, and that's what we're concerned about. Let's get these financial reports accurate so that we can rely on them, then we'll be able to tell you.
Okay, real quick, I'm going to go to Ms. Purcell and then Mr. Huber, and then with Mr. Huber, and then Councilmember, you want to ask some questions? Okay, Ms. Purcell.
I don't think this is intentional, you're not that kind of a guy, but when I asked my question before we went straight on to another question, the gentleman didn't get a chance to address, what happens to all these, predictions if it's something between 0 and 7%.
You can do it real quick.
So what happens? So basically, there's an infinite amount of possibilities in between those two scenarios. One thing we can know for certain, well, it's hard for me even to say that, but you're asking for an immediate repeal. So there will be an immediate reduction in revenues. So at the very least, going back to the slide that shows here, you will start to experience some of this. Now, if you're able to get rate increases in place fast enough, if you feel like the whole review of the capital program, the convincing of the public officials that there's a whole other alternative, if you think that it can happen in a month and a half before the operating reserves funds run out, then again, there's infinite possibilities. But I'm just here to point out this important component of time.
Just real quick, thank you for the presentation and thank you for explaining that. My question was really, what other courses of action beyond this? If we froze the 35%, what other courses of action are out there, things like that? I know you don't have the answer because that wasn't your assignment, but those are things to look at.
Yeah, I would.
Different questions, but thank you for the presentation.
No, thank you, and I. Oh, okay.
Number one, I thank you, and for the public, this is a guy that we're paying as financial advisor, we're paying him for his smarts. That's why we're bringing him in here. And there is some doubt when we get information from the city, we wanted the guy, the horse's mouth. It's no good to start the horse's tail. This is the guy we wanted. I appreciate your answers. I appreciate the fact that you're putting a spot here. When you say that we would lose the reserves, how much money do we have in reserves for the enterprise fund, the wastewater? Or is that something staff would know?
I would defer to staff. I think the number that the number that we have right now is per the audit.
Okay. So then, excuse me, Mike, let me ask one question. So then the question comes to the city manager. Mr. City Manager, if the smaller worst case scenario, if the $4.3 million swap penalty was incurred, where would we get the money to pay the penalty? And then I'll give you so that you know where I'm going. And if the worst case scenario, they ask for the full repayment of the bond, $16 million, where would we get the plan and the money to do that? What would be our option? Because I know you've talked to me that we have funds that would last for a period of time. I mean, what is, right now, I'm sure we have plans in place. If this happens, we do that. If that happens, we do that. We're not flying blind, I know that. What would be the plan to pay whatever we have?
Well, I think the last bullet says upon depletion of cash reserves, wastewater must borrow from other city funds to maintain operations. clear if we had to pay that back, which we have to pay the swap back, we have to borrow money. So we'd have to go to the markets, likely pay significantly more interest rates to get the cash to do that, and then we'd continue the process necessary to get the adequate funds, adequate rate increases to bring us out of the situation we find ourselves in today. That's the situation we would find ourselves in then. We're gonna have to look at other accounts. There's a comment about, you know, the use of, the impact the utilities have on our road system. Yeah, you could eliminate that. That would be a small piece of help for the wastewater fund. So you're gonna look at other cash, and look at the general fund. It can pay these bills. You'd have to cut services out of the general fund, because you know the situation we find ourselves in there. So you're gonna look at all of those options. Borrowing it from your own funds, which is highly, I'd never recommend that. But if you're in that dire of a situation, you're gonna have to do whatever it takes to keep your wastewater system running. So there's these options that are mostly listed there.
Just two more questions. If this dire situation were to happen, based on unfortunate circumstances, how much time do we have to make the decisions? 6 months, a year?
I think we've estimated that our operating reserves run out of money in February 2017. So we have enough money to operate out of reserves, and then we'd have to start looking for other options. You know, obviously, you know, there's comments about, well, you just haven't cut your budgets. I think Mr. Ryberg could tell you how many positions that didn't get filled over the past several years, the number of vacant offices and so forth. So I don't think that's the problem, is cutting. We're trying to restore those services from getting letters from the state and so forth. So cutting, I don't think, is going to be an option unless you just not maintain the plant operations, let alone the physical plant itself. So, you know, I guess the bottom line is, come November, we're going to find out what steps we have to take to move forward or not. So there's options we have, but I don't think there's any good ones moving forward. You have to borrow money. You have to find money.
Thank you very much. I have one more question. Thanks. Either Mr. Fisher or Bond Council, you're working for the city of Oxnard. Is there any way for us to beat this legally, to get out of these obligations?
I don't think that there really is. I mean, you have the integrity of the contracts. They're standard swap contracts, which is basically the purchasing of a bond by RBC. They bought a fixed rate, 4%, and they pay on a variable rate. So they arbitrage the difference between the two. They've probably sold that into the marketplace at this time, so they have obligations to others. I think it's very difficult to undo this deal without adversely affecting the city. Of course, you could do municipal bankruptcy and other things, which the city isn't going to do, but it would take that kind of uncertain approach to undo this. If I can make just a couple of points in following up on the city manager, I think your options are to replace the letter of credit, find another bank that's willing to step into those shoes of MUFG, to refinance the debt, to do that either on a shorter term, you're going to take market risk, but either on a shorter term or longer term, and then try to improve the situation. So you, in effect, repay that outstanding debt. That may or may involve, may or may not involve paying off that swap, but that would be also part of the refinancing. And then the other thing is to go back in and try to renegotiate with the bank, have them stay on, have everybody stay in place, but pay a higher fee based on how they perceive the risk to be in that circumstance. So just there are other alternatives as well as the in-between scenarios of how much money you raise. But ultimately, if you want to keep the certainty that Oxnard is worthy of being accredited and it doesn't get penalized for going to market, the integrity of this legal structure, which is used a lot, I think is pretty much inviolable at this point.
Thank you. Do you agree? Okay, that's my question.
Just real quick.
Yeah, I found it instructive that not a single one of the options that the city manager offered involved looking at somewhere between the zero and the higher rate at some of the alternative proposals that were mentioned by Mr. Molina and Ms. Purcell. I'm not sure how we make up for that omission, but I'd like to.
Slavery, we're going to have after the slavery.
This hasn't been talked about, but I thought I used to do a lot of, when I was finance guy, we used to do a lot of bond issues. And to me, I thought the bond covenants was not supported, was superior to any other, legal action that happened. In other words, if the bond covenants require 1-to-1 coverage ratio, and the city has to raise its rates to meet that, doesn't that supersede any other action, like this election? That would be my basic question. Since that covenant was made before, doesn't that make everything else moot after that? Any other
Well, that's
action?
essentially what's going on with the lawsuits right now.
Oh, okay. So okay.
And the judge has deferred consideration of that
Until after the
election.
election. All right,
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very
much. For being on the hot spot. We will now to review the risk management policy related to the use of city property. Mr. Pritchard, is that you or?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. There have been a few questions regarding the risk management policy as respects to the use of city property. So we have a few slides to go over this issue, and then we'll entertain questions. Just a short presentation. Regarding city property, there's 3 methods for rental of city property, and it's granted through either a lease, a license, or a permit. The authority to lease property has been granted to the city manager under the purchasing ordinance number 2520, which basically allows the city manager to enter into leases less than 3 years and less than $50,000 per year. In this case, we take the conservative approach and we bring to council any agreement over $25,000 that is over 3 years. Our risk management policies themselves require users of city facilities to provide proof of general liability insurance before they can access those facilities. And we require those regardless of whether it's a lease, a license, or a permit. And there are specific insurance exhibits depending on the type of use, whether there's vehicles, whether there's improvements to the real property. We have about 5 different insurance exhibits, all of which require general liability insurance, naming the city as additional insured, and then a highly rated insurance company, which is a rating of A, size of 7 or higher by AM Best company. The types of agreements that we enter into, leases are exclusive use of city property for a period of time. We have leases where the city is lessor, such as the Western Federal Credit Union, which is in the building across the street. We also have various cell site leases at various parks that are long-term agreements with entities. And then we also are a lessee in certain circumstances where we have to provide the insurance as well. As opposed to a lease, there's a license which is revocable at any time, and it's non-exclusive possession. A couple of examples are snack bars that the various baseball and softball leagues use, as well as Friends of the Library, which has a space within the library itself. And then there's also permits, which are essentially a short-term license of city property. This would bring into play the city sports fields, meeting rooms, Plaza Park, and South Oxnard Center, which are rented out for various events. For the lease and licenses, we have insurance requirements in the agreements that require that the entities provide the insurance and maintain that insurance. And as another backup, we also require them to indemnify and hold the city harmless in the event there are any claims because of their activities. Finally, permits. There's permits issued through various departments in the city. Planning issues permits for temporary use permits of city properties, which could be Plaza Park or other city properties. Recreation issues their permits for the use of sports fields and the South Oxnard Center. The library issues a permit for the use of Meeting Room B, which is used by various organizations. And the insurance requirements are basically the same as the other agreements, in which we require $1 million coverage and naming the city as additional insured. Finally, we do have a program in the event entities don't have insurance. We can sell it to them through a temporary users insurance program that's offered by our broker. And in all of these instances, city finance staff reviews the insurance and approves it before the licenses are granted to entities. So we'd like to entertain any questions. Yes, Councilmember.
Yes. The reason this is on the agenda, ladies and gentlemen, I was given information that there were issues with individuals collecting dates for use of City of Oxnard sports fields and then selling them at a profit for those uses, along with a question that was brought up about if there was insurance in place when these individuals were using them, and if there were background checks of the adults working with the children in these soccer fields. I brought this to the attention, it was brought to me by the attention of one individual who's a neighborhood chair. He's on the INCO, I believe he's in the audience today. I brought him to the attention of the city manager and the city attorney. The representative for Parks and Rec was at the meeting also. And that's, can you address that?
Absolutely.
Were people renting dates and selling them at a profit on the backs of the citizens of Oxnard? Were there not checks of insurance in place? And are there no background checks of the adults working with these kids on city property?
Why don't I address the background check?
Okay.
For the background check requirement is for city employees or volunteers that are directly engaged by the city if they are in a position of supervision of minors. That does not apply, that requirement that the city conduct background checks does not apply to folks coming on a lease or license or permit basis to use a city facility. If we were to take on that obligation and we didn't do it right, then we would expose ourselves to liability. So we do not conduct background checks on those in that situation. We do background checks for our volunteers, our staff that we engage for the purpose of being in a supervisory relationship with you.
Councilmember, concerning the issue regarding insurance, if the entity that has the license provides the insurance and then subsequently subleases or has other entities operating, their insurance is responsible for that activity. Regarding your second question concerning whether there has been subletting activities taking place, we don't know that to be fact. We understood that to be an allegation. However, about 1.5 years ago, there was a handbook that was put out by the Recreation Department that essentially disallows the subletting of sports fields from entities, specifically because there were allegations of making profit. And that handbook is available through the Recreation Department. We can get you a copy, but essentially subletting would result in the loss of rental allocation privileges.
To your knowledge, then, the claims that are brought to the city manager to be investigated, there's nothing they're not founded?
To our knowledge, that was an allegation that was over 1.5 years ago that has subsequently been resolved through the issuance of this this rental handbook.
And in the course of following up on that, information that was provided to us, in checking with staff, this is not an uncommon problem in other cities that manage recreation facilities. So when staff had heard about this previously, not based on our recent meeting, but when they learned about this, these allegations previously, they took their various policies relating to use of athletic fields and aggregated them into this handbook that all who reserve these fields get, so that they're very clear on what the requirements are. And I'd also like to point out that if somebody is doing that, if they were to pull the permit, in which case they'd have to have filed their insurance certificate that names the city as an additional insured, and they were to sublet it to somebody else, and some liability arose out of that subletter's use, then that insurance policy would still apply and protect the city. Now, I believe that as risk manager, Mr. Moore checked the claims history relating to athletic field use. Maybe you can explain what you...
Sure, absolutely. We checked a 10-year history of any claims related to sports activities on city property related to recreation, and found that there were only 3 claims in the past 10 years, none of which were actually paid out. They were just investigated by our third-party administrator. They spent a couple hours looking at the claim and then denying the claim, and the claims were related to such items as a ball hitting a windshield, and we denied the claim. And there were only 3 minor incidents like that, and we did not pay anything out to the claimant on those.
Yeah, so I just, real quick, any type of business that is done on the city property, whether it's a parking lot, a building, recreational field, must have one of the 3 licensing permits, special permits, and insurance that goes with it, correct?
Correct.
And anybody that does not have one of those items cannot use a city property.
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Okay, we'll go Mr. Huber, and then Mr. Villa, and then Mr. Nash, then Mr. Mulligan. Real quickly, please. We're still trying to shoot for time.
Councilmember Perello. My question is, it sounds like we, the city of Oxnard, are in the insurance business. Can you clarify why you have that bullet in there that we're selling insurance?
We're not actually in the insurance business. We do not get the revenue from it. The revenue goes directly to our broker, who has a program that's underwritten by an insurance company. So we're just a pass-through. We offer that as a service to entities that want to use city property, but for one reason or another don't have insurance. We rate the activity, come up with the premium, and remit that to the broker.
Okay, so if they have their insurance, they don't have to. They already
Correct.
have insurance, but you offer that you have someone who will insure.
Correct. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Mr. Nash, did you have a question?
Yeah, well, actually, it dovetails actually with what Mr. Huber said. Are the rates competitive?
I don't know what to compare them to. I mean, it's a program that is specifically for cities, and so it's probably going to be a relatively cheap program. We're talking, anywhere between $75 and $150 bucks, depending on the activity and whether there's alcohol involved. If there's, for instance, the South Oxnard Center has events and there may be alcohol involved. But.
Mr. Villa?
Yeah, is there anyone in charge to make sure that these groups have insurance coverage and it's up to date?
Yes, we do check all of that, and that is done through our department.
And how often is that done?
Every time we get a permit request, we check the insurance.
And so when they check the insurance, do they check to see if the premiums of those insurance have been met with the insurance company?
If we check the certificate, and the insurance company would not issue a certificate if the premiums weren't paid.
Well, some insurance, I know that it's an annual fee, and I know of some organizations, they'll apply for insurance coverage, but they'll only make minimal or less. They'll only make the one payment just to get the document and go the rest of the year.
They have to bring a certificate of insurance every time they get the permit license or anything else to present it to the city. So there's always a double check that it's valid. Because the insurance company won't issue that certificate unless it's valid.
Well, no, that's not true. It's like a car insurance. When you get your car insurance, you have your date of coverage.
No, what I'm saying is,
you make monthly payments.
I understand that, but when they bring in the application, they have to bring a fresh printed certificate of insurance.
Oh, every time they
go through
Every
the
time,
process.
yes, correct.
So that's the double check on it. Mr. Ballot, did you have a comment?
Yeah, a couple of questions, if you don't mind. And this may sound foolish, but how about picnics when groups gather, you know, like 30 or 40 people, and they do a Sunday afternoon picnic? Do they have to get a permit first to use that public park before they do that?
No.
I'm sorry.
No, it's a public park.
It's a public park.
Correct.
So under the city's domain, but they would not need to get that. Since I've been going around to different neighborhoods, the complaint I'm getting by some people is that in our soccer field, the sanctioned associations come out to use the field only to find out some unauthorized group has taken over the field, claiming they have the authority to do so. It happens on, I guess, Saturdays or Sundays. When I talk to code enforcement, and I don't want to get them in trouble, they're saying that the current budget doesn't allow them to have anyone do code enforcement over the weekend. So is there any, you know, at least every once a month or some method of going out to the fields to make sure that the people who are on the fields have in fact gone through this process? And then my last question, and this is just my personal interest, is this building still on land that the city is renting, or has the city acquired the land?
First question, I think that would be a question for recreation. It's really not the risk management topic side or the rental side.
It would be a risk if people are out there that have not gone through you, some child gets hurt, the father says, hey, we're at city property, $10 million lawsuit, only to find out.
We're not really able to answer that right now. We will get an answer for you. Someone will call you with it. I'm really trying to get us out of here today.
Yeah,
We got one more thing to get through.
How about this building goes?
This building is now owned, the land is owned by the city, correct?
Okay, Mr. Deshi?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you mention alcohol? Alcohol, do we allow that at the park?
No, I'm sorry, not at the park. There's certain facilities that do allow alcohol with respect to.
Tap and having an alcohol event at the performing arts center.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
We need to move to the last item, please. Item now, real quick.
No, actually, I just wanted to, we put it on the agenda because Councilmember Perello has a question related to page 2.
I have one question. Based on the city audit that was produced on page 20 of that audit, there is a item, it's 2015-008, and there's a finding, there's 3 columns, findings, recommendations, and city's response. The finding is the city did not have an audit committee. The recommendation established an audit committee along with a charter to govern its conduct. Members of this committee should be provided training. And the city's response, this is my question. I want to know who gave the city's response and who had the authority and why did they respond this way. The response from the city is the City of Oxnard's equivalent to an audit committee is the Fiscal Policy Task Force Committee, which has regularly scheduled monthly meetings prior to presentation to City Council. Now, I asked about this, and the City Attorney's Office provided me with a document, which I'll share with anybody that wants it, indicating that this organization was created in January 23rd of 07, Mayor Pro Tem Mulhart made a request for a future City Council discussion about possible formation. February 13th on 07, action was taken to approve it. But there is no bylaws, there is no mission statement, there is no nothing making this organization responsible for, as stated in this audit. Now, in full disclosure, I was appointed to this in October of last year. The audit is covering up to June of last year. That would, my interpretation, would make Councilman MacDonald and Mayor Pro Tem Carmen Ramirez responsible for the financial state of the city of Oxnard. And I'm going, bullshit. That's not what this says. And I want to know who took it upon themselves to put this in a response for the city that went to the state of California. And I asked the state controller's office, I've yet to get an answer on that, but I'm asking for somebody to give us an answer today. That's my question.
Is that something we can answer today, or is that going to take a little work?
We can get back to you on that specific question.
I've asked this question.
Well, what I can tell you now, Councilmember Perello, is that Dave Milliken was the CFO working with our auditors to respond to the management letter, and he, along with our controller, worked on the city's responses to the findings that was discussed and presented to the auditors.
I believe that as part of his response, he reviewed all of the record of minutes of the Fiscal Policy Task Force since its creation. And I believe that we had conversations about how in the past, prior auditors, as the current auditors have done, have come to the Fiscal Policy Task Force regarding the audit and the processes that were going on.
Well, I would just like to read the last two paragraphs of Mr. Jefferson Billingsley, the Assistant City Attorney, who I can credit with doing a good job in looking this up. The records from the meetings, this is right out of the report, the records from these meetings reflect that actions are attached. However, none of the City Council discussions or actions adopted, bylaws for the task force, provided any scope or duties of the task force, or gave any other direction. I have viewed the recordings of these meetings and confirmed the accuracy of these records. The documents reflect the formation of the Fiscal Policy Task Force as attached. My office has not located records of any bylaws or other documents related to the duties of the Fiscal Policy Task Force. This is consistent with past determinations from the City Attorney's Office regarding your previous queries about a charter for the City Fiscal Policy Task Force. I just share that with the public. Thank you. That's my question.
Okay. Thank you all for your effort in helping us be on time this morning. We will adjourn till the next meeting, which will be November 9th at 9 a.m. in this room.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.